After Massachusetts voted to legalize recreational marijuana, the state was building the industry from scratch. Activists and lawmakers established the country's first ever statewide pot shop equity program. The goal was to make sure the new industry benefited the same communities of color that were disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs and arrested at higher rates than their white neighbors. But in the years since businesses started sending in license applications, the industry hasn't exactly lived up to those expectations. So far, none of the 15 recreational stores in Massachusetts are minority operated, and 87% of the businesses with pending cannabis licenses are owned by white men, according to the Boston Globe. The equity issue is at the heart of a new series by the paper's Spotlight team, which has followed the leaders, lawmakers, and local residents fighting for diversity in the industry. One of the investigative reporters behind the series, Todd Wallack, joins me now. Todd, it's good to see you. Kobie Evans is one of the entrepreneurs featured in the reporting who's trying to open a pot shop in Mattapan. Good to meet you, Kobie. And a quick note before we start, Cannabis Commissioner Shailene Title originally planned to join us but had to cancel due to a family illness. We obviously hope her well. As I said a couple of seconds ago, Todd, first state in the country, from what I understand, to incorporate this social equity language in legislation, actually drafted in part by Commissioner Title. Is it fair to say so far this equity initiative has failed?
It hasn't happened. And you can have a debate about how important it is or not, but it's part of the law.
It's a law. I mean,
it is a law. It is a law, and it's certainly not being very effective.
And who do you blame for this? Blame may be too strong a word. Is it a problem in the law itself, or is the commission not been able to implement the law adequately? Where's the fault line here?
It looks like it has a bunch of different causes. One is that it turns out we've imposed so many regulations and hurdles to set up a marijuana business that it's really difficult, particularly for small entrepreneurs and minorities who often come from lower income backgrounds, to accumulate enough capital because of the federal prohibition of marijuana. Banks won't lend to businesses. So there are a lot of obstacles. Another thing is there are a couple programs the state regulators have set up to try to help small entrepreneurs and minorities, and they really haven't gotten off the ground so far.
Well, also one of the problems, it seems to me, that I discussed with the chair of the commission, Hoffman, the other day, and he said his counsel's looking into this, is this reporting you guys showed that while there is a 3 license limit in the established by the commission, that essentially these major companies are crawling through loopholes, apparently. One of them boasting, I read in the Globe, that they control, or whatever verb they use, at least 12 of these operations. Is that not accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. 2 different companies actually boast that they have at least a dozen licenses, either
Sea Hunter and Acreage Holdings.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
that they have somewhere in the licensing process.
So you have apparently broken through to a degree, have you not? What's the status of your application?
So we have a site in Dorchester as well as the one that we're applying for in Mattapan, and we were one of the lucky ones that attained what's called a host agreement with Boston. And so,
so what happens after you get a host agreement?
Well, then
what's next?
So you need a host agreement. Your application with the Cannabis Control Commission is dependent on a host agreement. And so now we move forward and, look to finalize our application and get a provisional approval.
Who owns your operation?
I do.
You do?
Yeah,
you do.
I do.
No outsiders?
No.
So why have you been able to break through, at least partially? I mean, you're not at the finish line yet, where so many other entrepreneurs of color apparently have not gotten that far, to say the least.
Well, I'd have to, give some accolades to the mayor of Boston, only because it really comes down to local control, and when the mayor in any municipality has his team out there working to make sure that there's equity, then you can get a host agreement. But unfortunately, in Massachusetts, for a minority or someone who's economic empowerment designation, you can't get a meeting to get a host agreement, and that's where the hole in the process is.
One of the other compliment of Mayor Walsh, Mayor Cartatoni is one mayor who was sitting in your chair a couple of minutes ago, has a pretty creative approach too, which is one of a kind so far. Is that not true? Sort of one dispensary and then one empowerment license granted, one, or you can't move forward?
So Somerville's one of the cities that is trying to figure out how to help the minority entrepreneurs and small entrepreneurs along the way. Obviously, as you point out, none of the 15 recreational shops that have opened so far are minority-owned, and few, if any, of the medical shops that have opened so far are minority-owned. So there's a long way to go to actually achieve that.
You know, one of the things that was so troubling about what Todd and his colleagues wrote, Kobie, was this, as I say, this sort of backdoor thing where it at least appears to me as a layperson that there's a violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of the statute and the regulations. You weren't immune to this either. From what I read in his piece, there were people from Ohio that would hope that you'd be the front for them.
Yeah, and they weren't the only ones.
What happened there?
You know, you get a phone call, and it's someone who says they want to invest in your business and support what you're doing, and so you go out and you have dinner and you meet people and you feel like a celebrity, and then, you know, when it's time to talk about the numbers, all of a sudden, you know, no one returns an email or a phone call, and so it's endemic of the system. When there's opportunity for people who are designated in a certain group, then there's others who want to exploit that.
But my understanding, they were less interested in investing in your business and more interested in controlling your business and having you be the front person.
Yeah, they were going to use this as a conduit to, you know, bolster their bottom line.
You know, I may be naive here, but I've interviewed Commissioner Chair Hoffman a couple of times. He seems to be totally well-intended and committed to this, and I mentioned the woman who's supposed to be here tonight drafted this language, I think that was in the ballot question, one of the drafters, Charlene Title. One of the things I've said to him repeatedly, it seems to me where they've fallen down on this front is, as you suggest, these pot shops are capital intensive in a big time way. Some of the other things, delivery services, for example, some of these cafes that are less capital intensive, which means that more members of the community, whether it's women, people of color, could get involved, have been backburnered. And I think the line from both Hoffman and the governor, who supports this slower pace, is let's get the first thing right. But that is a way that they could cut through a lot of this crap, not so much for the pot shops themselves, but for other smaller kinds of businesses. Is that not true?
That's certainly one of the proposals to try to deal with this issue. Of course, it is difficult competition because there's a lot of money pouring into this industry. You know, investors see marijuana not just green because of the plant. They see a lot of money to be made there.
So I asked Hoffman about a week ago at the library, or studio at the library, if he thinks that the commission has the ability to regain control of this issue. I'm paraphrasing. Or do we need statutory changes? And I believe he said, I think we can deal with this, and we are dealing with this. Is he right, or does the statute have holes in it that need fixing to ensure that this social equity goal is realized?
It's a great question. We haven't seen it tested in court, in part because it's early in the process. The commission is yet to try to pull any licenses, and it could ultimately end up in court to test exactly how far the law stretches.
Are you hopeful about the future? I don't mean just for you. You appear to be hopeful about you, and if I'm wrong, correct me. Are there going to be more yous, or you don't think so?
No.
Why is that?
There's a hole in the law. Massachusetts did something very unique and different in that they require local control, which is a host agreement. So my application can't be completed without going to the mayor of some small town and asking for a meeting to get a host agreement.
So what's the hole that needs to be filled?
Economic empowerment applicants should not be required to have a host agreement, period.
Have you just broached that with any of the leaders?
I've reached out to some of the local lawmakers. We have a meeting scheduled with Commissioner Title and Commissioner Hoffman next week. Unfortunately, it's outside of their purview. This is a legislative issue.
So you do think Beacon Hill's got to do something?
Absolutely.
It's good to meet you. I wish you a lot of luck.
Thanks
so much, Todd. Good reporting as always. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.